Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland. This is my introduction for my weekly newsletter for 28th of June 2019. I should perhaps just mention that I'm writing this on the first, just at the time when the weather alert has come out. So as I write this newsletter, it's telling me that first heat event of the season begins today. So they're kind of warning us about hot temperatures. Apparently we'll be getting 31 degrees Celsius combined with overnight lows near 21 degrees and expected to last for the next 3 to 5 days, which will mean it's going over the Canadian weekend, the Canada Day weekend, because Canada has a special day. I think it was Victoria Day it used to be, but Canada Day, and we're going to have a good weekend for sure. But anyway, because the weather's great, we'll all enjoy it, but make sure that if you're in Canada, at least you take some bottled water with you, and a little bit of salt would probably be worthwhile as well. So you can, just put it in a little bit of paper and just tie it up basically, and then you can just take a wee lick of salt and some water, and that'll keep you okay. You won't get dehydrated or anything. Okay, so on to what I've got for you this week. The first news story I have is City or Symbol. This is Dundee and the perils of regeneration. As you may know, the new V&A Museum there is a very futuristic building right on the waterfront, and it's been getting all kinds of awards and reviews in tourism magazines and everywhere. But this article is basically saying it's all very well to have that, but and they're talking about doing a major new waterfront property where there'll be shops, businesses and houses. But they're saying, but what about the rest of the city? What is it doing for the rest of the city? And that's where they're kind of questioning the benefits of these types of activities that are going on. So it's quite an interesting view, and it could apply to your city, wherever you are in the world, if you're doing a major project, on a tourism or cultural front. Okay, the next story is How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Nuclear Power. This is actually, which I thought was a very good article, it's actually in the Globe and Mail in Canada here. It says, stop the global climate crisis. We need emissions-free energy more than ever. And for all its risks, atomic power seems like a necessary evil. And it's quite an interesting, it's quite a lengthy article, but I think it's very good, and I think it's worth you pursuing and reading. Okay, next story is Build Us a Supermarket. I was quite intrigued when I found this. This is actually a BBC story, or at least it came through them anyway. It's primary school pupils in Glasgow have become award-winning filmmakers as part of a campaign for a supermarket to serve their community. And really, for kids, I think it was really, really well done. So I hope you might take the opportunity to watch that. Next one is auditors criticise pensions body over failed IT project. I highlight this because every major IT project that Scotland has done over the last several years has been an absolute disaster. And it doesn't seem like the SNP government can learn from anything. Gets it wrong, doesn't learn, does it again, makes another disaster, and yet another disaster. I mean, the police system was a disaster, the European farm grant system was a total disaster. This is another disaster. It's just appalling. And I think it's time that we should really insist that anyone that's going to be an MSP needs to have some kind of business qualifications. Because clearly the people that are in the parliament are just stupid, really stupid. And I'm sick fed up of it. It's just wasting millions in public money, and we're getting nothing back. I mean, this one says, Audit Scotland said the SPPA had not applied enough scrutiny to Capita's bid and now had a £23 million gap in its budgets. Just appalling. I mean, read it and weep basically, but the thing is, I've been highlighting these kind of major IT projects and none of them seem to work. I mean, I haven't heard of any successful one. Everything's been a disaster. Okay, the next one which went was Alphabet unveils Toronto Smart City Master Plan details. This is Alphabet on Monday released details for proposed smart city development for Toronto, outlining plans in a 1,500-page document. So I've given you a link to read that because it's not just obviously for Toronto, but it could be applied to any other city in the world, really. So I think it's well worth learning about what they're looking at doing. Whether they do it, of course, is a different thing. Then another tweet mentors was the UK's F-35 stealth jets fly the first operational missions. It says the UK's most advanced and expensive fighter jets have been used on operational missions for the first time. And there's a bit of video there with it. It's a BBC article. Then the next one is Britain and America are at their best when they work together. It says Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher understood that our strength lay in people, not governments. And this is a CapEx story, which I thought was very good. And then the next was how trade can help rebalance the post-Brexit economy. It says free ports and opportunity zones can help power Britain's post-Brexit growth. Again, that's another CapEx story. And further CapEx story is blocking no deal is easier said than done. Stating your willingness to block no deal is one thing. Actually doing so is another matter. And then one from Brexit Central is the next Prime Minister needs a Chancellor who will defy the Treasury factory of Remain. It says Brexiteers see it as a factory of Remain spewing anti-Brexit bile from the midst of government and in dire need of change. So well worth reading because I've always thought the Treasury, all their forecasts are terrible and every single one has been way wrong by a massive margin. So there's lies coming out of the Treasury and it's got to stop basically. And so I think you should read that article if you agree with me. Next one is the right post-Brexit trade and investment policy can rebalance economic disparity across UK regions. Again, this is another Brexit Central story, but it's almost inevitable that Brexit will lead to a marked change to the UK's current approach to international trade and investment, with the government having an exciting opportunity to construct an independent set of policies. And part of those policies are having free trade zones in the northern England regions, like Manchester, Newcastle, places like that. And I think that would be brilliant, to be honest. And the next story is why a logbook at Scotland's most remote youth hostel remains so special after 40 years. It says, as strange as this might seem, the log kept at Loch Ossian's youth hostel in the Highlands addresses near Contour has been going for more than 40 years and continues to grow. And they give you some wee insights. It's amazing the people that have actually stayed there and filled in the logbook. So I was quite attracted to that one. Next one is devastating increase in Scotland's suicide rate. It's the devastating bit. The NHS Information Services Division said there were 784 probable suicides in Scotland in 2018, up from 680 in 2017. So that's a fair whacking increase, that. And then the next story was taking stock at Holyrood after 20 years. Well, it's quite an anniversary, so I thought, well, this might be of interest. It says 3 years on from the Brexit vote, 20 years on from the dawn of devolution, less than 2 years out from the sixth Holyrood election, and as the academic year draws to a close, it's time for stock taking. So, thought you might. This is a BBC story. Then another one from CapX is the EU's tech tax plan is flimsy, ill-judged, and legally dubious. It says the next Chancellor must do away with a pointless, distortionary digital services tax. Oh yeah, and this is one that got me thinking again, is I was suspected of causing my child's illness. Her daughter was taken into foster care and the family was not reunited until a year later when the case was dropped. I mean, this is just appalling. You keep getting these stories from Scotland. I tell you, if the social services ever call on you, be scared. Be very afraid. Because they have the right to totally destroy your family. And no one will be blamed for it other than you. It's disgusting. It's got to stop. And frankly, it's time that some of these social workers get put in prison for their actions. I mean, they destroy a family, can walk away, nothing happens to them. They might get wrapped over the knuckles, and that's the extent of it. It's not good enough. We have to do something about it. So I'd like you to read that and think about it as well. Next story is more voters want to quit the EU now than at the time of the British referendum. It says more voters want Britain to quit the EU now than at the time of the Brexit referendum, a fresh poll has revealed. That's from The Sun. The EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. This week the EU has signed a new agreement with Vietnam. There has been no debate in Parliament about it, and the UK has no right to reject it or to require improvements and amendments, which just goes to show why we need to leave the EU. Read the article. It's from John Redwood, the MP in England. He's basically for Brexit. But you know, it just goes to show what's getting bumped through into British law because the EU make decisions. We've no right to block these kind of things, and we need to have that right. Okay, and the final story is UK discovers 26 billion in statistics review. Says Britain's economy is around 1.3% larger than previously thought, a gain of 26 billion. Statisticians said on Thursday after a major revision of growth data from the past 20 years. I mean, this is from Reuters, but you know, I haven't seen that being discussed anywhere else. I mean, that's just blinking amazing. 26 billion in errors because of the way we work things. I mean, you need to read that. Well, you don't need to read it, but I advise you to read it. Okay, so those were the stories I picked for you this week. I might add that I did come to think about how we could get out of the EU with a no deal. I think Macron, and the President of France, he's basically sick fed up with this Brexit thing, and he wants us just to get kicked out on the 31st of October. And I think the best way for us to come out with a no deal is actually to enrage him even further. And so that way, it's not up to the British people anymore. It's France that will kick us out, because all France needs to do is veto any extension. They said, no, we're not going to accept it. We want them out, and we'd have to be out. So no matter how many stupid politicians want to remain in, France could kick us out just like that. So that's what I think we should do, is we should annoy Macron even more, make sure that he will not support any more extensions. End of story. Ha ha ha! How do you Remainers like that then, eh? Ha! Okay, on to Electric Canadian. The Canadian Horticulturalist. I've got volume 32 out for 1909. I've got a little book on Canadian archaeology. You didn't know Canada had archaeology, I'll bet, but if you look at what's going on what's that island? I can't remember. It's where they're looking at the Knight's treasure. Oak Island, that's it, Oak Island. They're doing a huge amount of digging there because they think there's a big treasure to be found. And I'm fascinated as soon as the new, in fact I think that they're probably about starting up now on a new dig this year, so I'm looking forward to seeing how they get on with Oak Island. I've been fascinated with all the ups and downs that they have there. Okay, another book I found with interest is A Canadian Bank Clerk by J.P. Bushland. It was produced in 1913. And it's really about a Canadian bank clerk, how he got into the bank and how he's progressing in the bank. And so I just thought you don't often read a book about bank clerks, so I thought this was kind of interesting. So it's there if you'd like to have a read. Then the next one is Canadians of Italian Descent Don't Need Trudeau's Apology. I added this to our Italy page, and the article can be viewed on the Globe and Mail website, and I've given you a link to that. But it's kind of an interesting viewpoint. Then The Canadian Builder. This is a practical paper devoted to all branches of the building trade. And I found volume 1, issue 2, and I've given you a link to that. But I've also mentioned that if you go to our magazine index page, which you can get from the top menu of Electric Canadian, there is a link which will find you another 43 other issues of that. So if you want to read more, there's a lot of other issues available. And the next one I've got is The Canadian Commonwealth. It's by Agnes C. Lord, produced in 1915. It's obviously you know about the British Commonwealth, so this is the Canadian Commonwealth, and I thought you might be interested in having a wee read of that. Then I've got Canadian Portraits. It says the history of a pioneer community offers a rich field to the biographer, for by its very nature the frontier attracts unique and progressive individuals. The exacting demands of a new country can be met only by men and women with initiative and originality. The pioneer is a man who ventures out on an uncharted course and who stakes his future on his ability to adapt himself to new and strange conditions of life. The portraits which have been sketched in this volume are drawn from 300 years of Canadian history. They are the stories of men who, as successive generations have passed on towards now new frontiers of settlement, have built their lives into the very foundations of the country. To the beginnings of civilization in Canada, they have brought the rare qualities of the pioneer: strength of character, courage, the ability to improvise, confidence in the future. In the life of each one of them, the spirit of adventure was ever present, leading always to a new experience and fresh discoveries. I'll finish this by saying that these biographies were prepared originally as radio talks, and they were presented in a series arranged by the Radio Committee of the Canadian Historical Association for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. The subjects were selected from many different periods in Canadian history and from the whole length and breadth of the country. They represent also a wide variety of ability and interest, and the list includes explorers, politicians, scientists, artists, teachers, a lumber king, a judge, a village bard. Many familiar names are missing, for the purpose of the series was to tell new stories rather than report old ones. The subjects are therefore men whose fame has been less generally known, but who hold an undisputed place in the company of great Canadians. So I personally have really enjoyed reading through that, so I hope you do as well. And that's it for Electric Canadian. So on to Electric Scotland now. We've got Scotland's Highlands. This, I came across a half-hour video and thought I'd share it with you. The next day I found another 3 videos in the series, so have added those as well. I posted those in our community, and I've given you a link to the thread where you can see all 4 of them. James Inwick is a ploughman and elder. It's by P. Hay Hunter, produced in 1896, and also contains a glossary for all the broad Scots words used in it. So that can be quite handy there. The General Grievances and Oppression of the Isles of Orkney and Shetland, by Mr. James Mackenzie, produced in 1836. Is how Orkney and Shetland came under Scottish control, and you can read this and I give you a link to the book. Then I have Pagan Scotland. This is a BBC audio recording. I listened to it, I thought it was good, so I gave you a link to it. It's on the Internet Archive. And then Scotland in Pagan Times, Christian and Pagan Burial, Viking Burials, Northern Burials and Hordes, the Celtic art of the pagan period, the architecture of the Brochs and their contents, lake dwellings, hill forks and earth houses. I also added a link to a Time Team dig, which was done in season 13, episode 13, which is about a Scotch broth at Applecross in Scotland. Shows you the specs, might be there, and they did the dig and they proved there is actually a broch there. So I thought it was quite a fascinating one. So I've given you a link to the page where you can obviously read the book and view that video. The next one is The Pageant of the Fourth. It's by Stuart Dick with 24 illustrations in colour by Scottish artists, produced in 1911. And I've popped that up for you to have a read at. Historical account of the family of Hay of Leys. It's a small PDF book I discovered, which I added a link to on our Clan Hay page. And then I've got the history of the House of Seaton to the year 1559 by Sir Richard Maitland of Leathington, with the continuation by Alexander Viscount Kingston to 1687. This actual book was produced in 1828. So I've added this to our Clan Seaton page. I will say the House of Seaton is spelled Seyton, but our Clan Seaton page is Seton. But actually both spellings are mentioned in the book, so that's okay. John Hay, author and statesman, by Lawrence Sears, 1914. This is a biography of him. He actually has some Scots blood in him, because it says at the start that it was a Scottish soldier of fortune who was his grandfather. So he's also got German background as well. So he's a mix. But I've added this to our Scots American history page. And also to that, I've got the next one up, which is about Abraham Lincoln. And the reason I put this Abraham Lincoln massive publication up is that while reading the history of John Hay, his biography, that's when I discovered he was a co-author of the 10-volume biography of Abraham Lincoln. And of course, John Hay was a very good friend, and he was mentored by Abraham Lincoln and spent some years with him in the White House and elsewhere, as was the co-author. So I thought to myself, if you're going to get a good history of someone, it's better if someone that knows him and has worked for him actually writes these kind of things. So I've added I was trying to figure out where to put it. I have put a link to it from the Scots American History page off the site, but I've actually placed the main information on an article about Robert Burns and Abraham Lincoln in the Robert Burns Lives section of the site. I thought to myself, because clearly Abraham Lincoln was really a great fan of Burns, and some people reckon he actually could remember every single Burns poems and recite them anytime he wanted from memory. And I mean, you'd only do that if you're passionate. And apparently he had organised to come after the Civil War was over. He had actually arranged to book a trip to Scotland to actually see where Robert Burns came from. But unfortunately he was assassinated before he could actually take the trip. But in the article about that, it mentions that his wife, some years later, actually did come over to see the Robert Burns place. So obviously she was imbued with that as well. So really interesting article anyway, but if you go to the bottom of the article, I've popped in the author's preface to the book, which I actually give you here in the newsletter as well. It's quite big, but I think it's worth having a read, because then you can understand where we're coming from on this massive 10-volume history. So if you're really keen on Civil War history and stuff like that, then fantastic read. And then the final one I've got under Electric Scotland is The Name of Gordon. This is the patronymics that it has replaced or supplemented, collated by J.M. Bullock in 1906. I kind of wish every clan would have a book like this. I mean, if you read it, if you just read it from the point of view of understanding how different names can come up in association with a clan, I think that would help your understanding of where septs and everything come from. But this book clearly explains that there's many people of the name of Gordon that have nothing to do with Gordon in their DNA, basically. And it shows you how that happens. And it mentions that it wasn't until about the 15th century that surnames came into more general use, because a lot of people just adopted the names because they maybe lived under the Gordons, so they thought, oh, well, we go with Gordon. But there were nothing DNA related to Gordons, it's just because they were living under them, they adopted the name. And there was many other reasons why you adopted a name. So I think it's well worth reading it from that understanding point of view. But of course, if you're a Gordon in particular, you should be particularly interested in that. Okay, and then the story this week is a Canadian story. It's basically 20 things you had no idea were invented in Canada. And we start off with peanut butter. Then the IMAX. We've got goalie mask, global time zones, Trivial Pursuit, rotary snowplow or snowblower, snowmobile, garbage bag, Macintosh apples, Yukon Gold potatoes, walkie-talkie, egg carton, push-up bra, hard cup jockstrap, baggage tag, would you believe, wheelchair accessible bus, motorized wheelchair, pacemaker, green ink for American money, insight treatment for diabetes, insulin treatment for diabetes. So I thought they were kind of interesting. I thought you might like to have a read at them. So that's what I've made the story for this week. So that's it, and hope you all have a great weekend when it comes. And if you're in Canada, enjoy Canada Day and a Canada weekend. Have a great time. Okay, nice talking to you. Always feel free to leave comments. Thanks. Take care.